I'd suggest none of you leave at this point because I'm going to introduce Dr. Vivian Ming, who's got a fantastic perspective around AI and applying it in a lot of innovative ways, very consistent with what I just talked about. So with that, I'll introduce Vivian Ming to the stage.
All right. I just got off of another stage, rushed over here. That's my excuse for looking this good. AI for good. I've decided to change this talk. I've got a total of 2 slides, and I've already decided to skip one of them. Paul just had a chance to talk to you about the future of work and how we expect that to play out. I have similar, though slightly different feelings, and I have my own book coming out, How to Robot-Proof Your Kids. Keep an eye open. Maybe you want to get them as a pair, and you could give one away for Christmas and keep the other. Even if you don't celebrate, it's a great gift. So I'm not going to dwell on that, which was one of the original focuses here. Instead, I want to think about, in my context, which is how do we develop machine learning and artificial intelligence that can truly unambiguously do good in the world. Not to belittle the importance of having technologies that can optimize your supply chain, that can help you target the right potential sales company, but there's something profound about being able to save a life that is, I will tell you, incredibly rewarding. And I want to focus on that. So instead of this provocative statement, I'm going to make another one. Technology must always challenge us. So when you turn it off, you're actually better than when you first turned it on. So what do I mean by that? Let me give you a negative example, and it's a fairly provocative one. So I'm a neuroscientist by training. One of the things we know is prophylactic against long-term cognitive decline, early dementia, is navigating through space. But none of us do it anymore. I don't. I open up my phone, I call up a map, it tells me where to go and how to get around traffic. I put a little thought into it, but not that much. I'm not a futurist, I don't typically make predictions and this sort of thing, but I'll make one here. 40 years from now, we will see a significant increase in the incidence of early onset dementia, specifically because of automated maps. And that should worry you, because it's a great technology. Who wouldn't want a map? I travel all around the world, and suddenly I'm a local everywhere. I managed to get the thing to work in Shenzhen. I don't know how. I got kicked off WeChat permanently within like an hour of landing in China. I don't know what I said, but that was then. But I could get Google Maps to work, and I could find my way around, and it was wonderful. But even though I'm better when I'm using it, I might actually be worse off when I finally turn it off. And this plays in, so I'm going to really briefly tell you about 6 little stories of things that I built. I'm actually going to start with a 7th, which was a prototype. We never actually built it out, but it gives you a sense of what I mean. So this was for Alzheimer's. So for a while, I've got in my office mobile EEG, so brain waves, brain imaging. Google Glass. I had an early pair, in fact, I may even talk a little bit about it in one of these stories, an early pair of Google Glass pre-release to sort of explore things we could actually build with it. And I have some experience with hacking sort of the wearable equipment and putting it towards a purpose. And one of the things we thought about in a project with some postdocs at UC Berkeley was, what if someone had an early diagnosis of Alzheimer's? Very early on. And so we could go in them, and forgive me, this is the truth of very early technology, we make you look like just a fucking idiot. You know, we stick a wireless EEG in Google Glass, and you roll this stuff, you're like a Borg. But what we start to do is build a model of who you are. So when I see someone and I process their face and I have an emotional reaction to them, we build a model of that. As I navigate through space and interactions with certain people in certain places produce reactions, we build a model of that. I'm not talking overly sophisticated. In many cases, the original prototype vision here was really straightforward, simple stuff. Simple. 10 years before, impossible science fiction. Wait 10 years and it's a dumb app on your phone. So in this case, though, the goal is, as the disease progresses and you start to see that loss of function, what happens in that first moment when you don't recognize your own child? That terrible sense of the loss of self and a loss of independence. So it turns out, not with a mobile EEG, although I think we will get there someday, you can actually pick up on the neural signature of that memory failure before you're aware of it, and flash the name of your child in the heads-up screen on the Google Glass. Now, there's more sophisticated things you could do, but let's just start with the minimal. The MVP product here is, yeah, of course that's my son's name. And you don't experience the memory failure. We have no idea whether this sort of thing will actually help with the mortality and the progression of the disease. But imagine 5 years of your life having 3 of those where you get to be you. And we scaffold that, and we give you the augmented intelligence rather than the artificial intelligence to be you for as long as possible. So, the whole idea here is that it only turns on when you need it. It only turns on when it detects the memory failure. So much of what we're building today is intervening, it's substituting for what we can already do. Challenging technology shouldn't substitute. Challenging technology should make us better. So here are 6 little examples. Now, when I got Google Glass, I built a couple of things for it. One was a system for autistic kids. So we could look out across the audience and I could read your facial expressions, and you could do all sorts of things with it. In fact, I learned how to do this in my undergraduate lab years and years ago. We were doing real-time lie detection for the CIA. So, a little morally gray, but a fascinating project to work on. 15 years ago when this was cutting-edge stuff. Now it turns out, like I said, it's a dumb little app on your phone. I actually mean that literally. My lab spun off as a startup and got bought by Apple. All the new Animoji stuff, the face modeling, that's my old lab. And we were envisioning, wow, if you could record the facial things, and you don't have to send a video, you just send face coordinates, then you animate a little face on the other side, and they finally got the budget to build the damn thing. There's a great story behind this, but we have so little time. So another thing I built for Google Glass, in fact, I wore it for about 3 years, way longer than anyone at Google did. This was not a scorcher of a technology. And the reason was because they wanted to keep it lightweight and fun and social. And they didn't want to scare people by making them think the Google Glass was, reading everyone's faces and doing lie detection and credit scores and pulling up your Ashley Madison account or something, which, I built for myself. But, but when you say no to technologies like that, you say no to superpowers. If you're autistic, reading a facial expression is a superpower. It's something that your biology doesn't give you for free. The standard technology for dealing with that today is cartoon faces on flashcards. That's really disappointing. So we built this thing, and it extracts what's called the facial action code, all the stuff we were doing in the lie detection. It infers the emotion, it writes it on the screen, and in real-time interactions, in social interactions with other people, these kids can learn how to read facial expressions. And not only can they learn them, but it turns out they learn a theory of mind, empathy. It increases their ability to understand why people do what they do. They preserve what's amazing about being different, but you scaffold them. You build this augmentative system that compensates for some of the things they're not as good at. Another thing we had for Google Glass is for this little kid in the corner with the goggles and the funny hat. So a panel of internationally renowned scientists was put together, determined him to be the cutest kid in the world. The fact that the panel was exclusively made up of his moms is purely a coincidence. So this is my son, and 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And, that was hard. The 4 days over Thanksgiving weekend that we spent at what is now Benioff UCSF Oakland Children's Hospital was not a fun 4 days. But we left as a whole family, and not every family there had that chance. So, perspective. What was shocking to me was a month later. My wife and I started collecting everything. We crashed Google Docs, everything he ate, to the gram. Every activity level, his heart rate, did he have the sniffles, was he grouchy that morning, everything. Then before our first outpatient visit with his endocrinologist, a person I greatly respect and like, we emailed it to him. And they didn't really respond, so he thought, oh, they want a printout. So we show up with like an inch-thick stack of spreadsheet printout. They were angry with us for wasting their time. What am I supposed to do with this data? But by the way, if during the course of your job you ever say, what am I supposed to do with that data? That job is not long for this world. That is the sort of thing that makes people like me salivate. Oh, I can automate that job away and make $1 billion. At least in theory. I haven't been smart enough to take the billion yet. But that very day, in my wild arrogance as a theoretical neuroscientist, I thought, I make models of the brain. Are you telling me diabetes is more complex than the brain? So we hacked all of his equipment, his insulin pump, his continuous glucose monitor, smartwatch. Turns out we broke several federal laws in doing so. I didn't realize that at the time. And instead of sending that data to some black box server at a corporate headquarters somewhere, which I guarantee you they were doing nothing with, I sent it to my server. And I built a model based on predictive coding in the retina to actually predict his blood glucose levels hours into the future. So no one else had done this. Why? Well, that's hard to say. Certainly the machine learning was there to do it. But I think people looked at this and they thought, we understand diabetes and the dynamics of digestion, and there's nothing there that you could improve. The machine learning people, where do you get the data from? Well, you abuse your children. So we built this thing, and it turns out it was able to predict hours into the future with a very high degree of accuracy whether his blood glucose levels would go high or low. I met President Obama at the White House wearing Google Glass. Secret Service wasn't thrilled. This is actually why I met him. That was the other choice besides kicking me out. So my first words to the President of the United States were, okay, Glass, take a picture. Which really did not improve his opinion of me. But the reason I was wearing them is my son was back here in San Francisco, and I was still getting real-time updates about whether his blood glucose levels were going high or low. And that was an incredible experience. I built a superpower. Of course I don't mind people calling me a glass hole. I'm a mom. That is powerful. Anyone would look like an idiot in exchange for knowing that their child was safe. Sometimes it's hard on my son. He's 10 now, and he doesn't get to eat everything he wants to eat. He doesn't always get to do the stuff the other kids get to do because all the adults are so scared of what might happen. And when it gets really hard, I let him know that one of the coolest, so we gave, most of this is on here we just gave away. So in this case, Eli Lilly, for example, is building a predictive artificial pancreas that in simulation works better than the real thing, which has some interesting ethical implications for anyone that has a family history of type 2 diabetes. But when my son is having a hard day, I remind him that because we went through this, millions of people will be alive, that he had a role in making the world a better place. Now, AI didn't figure highly in that story. I didn't describe to you the model we used in any real detail. It's just a tool. It's a tool that allows you to take a real human problem, identify a human solution, but then make it available to everyone. And in this way, I'm enormously proud of what we did. Right next to that, as I slowly run out of time, so I can't give you the full spiel behind it, is what we might now think of as a deep neural network. This is sort of prior to that term coming in vogue. And it's learning about faces. So every little seeming face up there isn't a real person. It's a word. It's a word and a language about faces. And in fact, as you move to higher levels in the network, that language gets more abstract. So it moves from, slightly East Asian-y looking with glasses to competent or lonely. And we actually ran some experiments looking at whether we could learn these abstract terms. And as long as people were consistent in the way they make their judgments, the damn thing could actually learn it. And again, there's all sorts of things you could do with a system like this. We built a stupid little game called Sexy Face, and our promise was, for free, play the game, and we'll find everyone on Facebook that thinks that you think is sexy. And for $5, we'll find everyone who thinks you're sexy. But it's actually a Trojan. The whole point was, how do we get enough people to play this game so we can learn how people make judgments about faces? What it was actually for was a UN project called Refugees United. We built this system that could actually, so there's over 1 million orphan refugees in refugee camps around the world. And the way at the time, 10 years ago, they were dealing with it was a book with 1 million photographs in it. So we built this thing. If you could get an iPad, it took about 3 minutes. My niece looks a little bit more like this kid, a little more like this. If she's in a camp anywhere in the world, you found her. That's what AI can do. And again, I don't want to dismiss the importance of artificial intelligence for your businesses. But this is a transformative in the way we think about, should we allow these sorts of technologies to be out there and ubiquitous in the public? If you're scared about having ubiquitous face recognition technologies, that's perfectly fine. I shouldn't make that decision. We should. But we should do it knowing, therefore, that we won't have that technology available for those autistic kids. And we may not have it in the case of these orphans. And in fact, maybe what we really want to do is not say yes or no to any of these technologies, but really confront the complex ethics of these decisions and focus on the things that are actually going to make us better as people. So next to the faces is the little baby. If you can't tell what that is, it's a cochlear implant. So it is the first widely available neuroprosthetic. It's been around for decades now. In this case, it's a magnetic one, so it's implanted under the skin. It wires into the 8th cranial nerve, the auditory nerve, and it's basically a hearing aid that wires to the brain. So if you are profoundly deaf, it can actually restore hearing. And then a little kid like that, when they grow up, it'll be hard to tell that they were ever deaf. Now, in the deaf community, that can be very controversial, but setting that aside, the problem is in adults, it's a terrible experience. You listen to the whole world through a garbage disposal for the rest of your life. Your brain just isn't quite as plastic anymore. It doesn't deal with the new sounds. So it's actually one of my very first applied projects in my life was taking an algorithm I built as a graduate student that learned how to hear for pure basic science purposes, just based on information theory, which we found to be the why of hearing, but not the what. And if instead we created an artificial ear, a cochlear implant, that had the same why instead of the same what, so an artificial ear that learned how to hear on its own, adults within 30 minutes could hear 50% more of what was being said to them. And wow, that had an impact. To know that you were immediately making people's lives better using this technology in an unambiguous way. That was the experience that got me hooked on building these things. The little heat map you see there of Manhattan Island, which you can't see, there you go. That was a company that I was on the board of. I have a very simple process for deciding whether I want to join the board of a company. Do I like these people? Do I think they can actually be successful at what they're trying to do? And then my ask. And my ask isn't about money, it's about data. In this case, they built a system for phones. It passively estimated emotional states. And my ask for them was, give me all of your data. I want to build a system that predicts manic episodes in bipolar sufferers. So if you're not familiar with bipolar, this is one of the, turns out, costliest mental health disorders in the world. 25% of severe sufferers go on to kill themselves. It is famously characterized by these elated creative highs and then crushing depressions. And you go back and forth. Treatments like lithium only work in about half of sufferers. We didn't even know why for most of the history of this disease. Just last year, first papers explaining molecularly why lithium worked at all and why it didn't work at half of sufferers. So with no background in it whatsoever, I said, I will join your board. If you give me all of your data, I'm going to predict manic episodes. Can it be done? How would I know? So I educated my dumbass. What I do for every one of these projects, including all of my companies, I spend months reading everything I can find, not about algorithms, but the actual problem space. Bipolar disorder has been studied for 100 years. Who's the right person to hire has been studied for 100 years. How people make judgments about faces, how people hear, education, workforce development have all been studied. There's a tendency in data science and machine learning to think you're inventing things for the first time, but you never are. And in most of the cases, if you don't recognize that, you find solutions that aren't actual solutions. I recently read a paper that said, in all seriousness, our algorithms said the best people to hire were white men. Turns out that's not very good science. That is, I fully believe, the actual statistical relationship they found in the data, which is, if you look at the hiring of most tech companies, that is their most likely hiring candidate. Does it actually predict the quality of work people do? One of my past companies, I was chief scientist. We built a database of 122 million people, and we looked at that exact question. It didn't predict shit. Nor did your grades or your test scores, university, weekly predictive. Not once we knew other things about you. So it is so easy to be misled if you don't actually understand the problem domain, if you don't understand people. That's the heart of good AI. Whether it's for good or for your companies, it doesn't matter. You are only ever solving human problems. So we built this, and I came to believe it would actually work because I found a paper that said if you took someone with a genetic predisposition for bipolar disorder into the lab and you gave them a big battery of tests once a week, you could actually see 6 to 8 weeks before their first ever episode, you could see changes in their emotions and cognitive states. So all I was really saying is, could we pick up some degree of that on your mobile phone? And it turns out the answer was unambiguously, yeah, you could actually eyeball it. We didn't even need any fancy algorithms here. 3 to 4 weeks before the subjective onset of a manic episode, we saw clear evidence of change, largely in the movement patterns. So for example, you're seeing the heat map there showing how certain parts of Manhattan were triggers for this person. But that was just really it was integrating these 12 different sensory packs on the phone together that really mattered. Next to that, we're looking at education outcomes. Can we actually predict the life outcomes of young children? But instead of then just creating a report and telling their parents, oh, hey, your kid's gonna win the Nobel Prize. Oh, so sorry, your child's gonna drop out in 3rd grade. Turns out, it doesn't matter whether it's a positive or negative prediction. If I tell you, it only makes things worse. So we actually built this system. It exists out in the world. It's called Muse, kind of a big experiment to see how well we can do. But instead of creating a profile, what we do is create an activity, a game, every night to play with your child. My point isn't what will your child's outcome be, because who cares? My point is, how can we make it better? How can we make certain that they'll live longer, that they'll be happier, that they'll have a bigger impact on the world? There's an amazing body of research looking at life outcomes and the things that are predictive of those outcomes. Again, we built some very fancy machine learning. We could analyze images of kids' artworks. I actually just came from Denmark talking to the Lego Foundation, doing the same thing with Legos. We can predict parents' answers to complex questions about their children, but none of that mattered. We can serve the whole thing up, SMS, virtually anywhere in the world, and all it says is, hey, do you have 20 minutes to spend with your child tonight? Here's how you should spend that time. A lot of very complex systems behind the scene, all meant to a simple thing: make a parent, a grandparent, a foster parent's time worthwhile and change the life outcomes of that kid. And I'll end with this. There's you probably have all seen many social graphs before. That is actually of a small segment of Accenture. I'm doing a project with them right now. You've seen many of those sorts of things, but when I look at it, what I'm actually seeing is how information flows through Accenture. We're modeling out their social connectedness throughout the company and looking at an individual level. Every one of those dots is a person. What is their unique value add to that company? Not just in terms of what their manager says, or did they hit specific numbers in terms of writing enough lines of code, but in fact, did they make the people around them better? Were they collaborative in their work? Did they have a great idea and it flowed out? And then can we build an AI that's closed loop and comes in and says, you know what, here's what you need to do to improve the life outcomes of your employees. And guess what the best way to build that company in the future is to build explorers, creative, adaptive, not just problem solvers, problem identifiers. They will go out and change the world. And then you sit back like a lazy CEO you are and you just reap the benefits, right? Isn't that how it works? This is what I love to build. This is what AI can be about. I wouldn't do this work if I didn't believe that AI could make the world better. But at the same time, it doesn't magically make it better. The world isn't better because we've doubled the processing speed. It's better because we have an effective tool that can take a real human solution and share it with everyone in the world. And as you begin to think about how you want to transform your companies with the kinds of technologies we're talking about in this session, really think hard about the core problems you're trying to solve. It's not algorithms, it's always people. And if you keep that in your mind, you're making the world better, not just for your company, but for you and for your kids. And that's what really gets me out of bed in the morning. So thank you very much.